Hey everybody, welcome. I'm here again with you today to talk about some research updates that have some relevance to individuals with lipedema. I'm so happy to be here with you again today. There has just been so many papers written about lipedema, so many studies coming out. I'm really getting quite a backlog of papers to talk to you about because there's just so many out there. I love it if you will also send me any papers that you hope that I can review and talk about on these research updates. Remember, we're here 2 Thursdays a month. And if everything else considered, hopefully I'm here for 2 Thursdays a month to talk about these papers. So please send them to me. Here's my email, leslyn@lipidemaproject.org. So that I can also review things that you want us to talk about. I will, after I'm all done talking about the paper for today, I have a couple of announcements. We have some nice events coming up for individuals with lipedema and their loved ones. So I will let you know about that. You'll see right here is a free webinar is going to be happening tomorrow. So I'll give you more details about that. It's right after I talk about this paper. Another great paper just came out. It's Ketogenic Diet, a nutritional therapeutic tool for lipedema. And this just came out in November 2023. It was in Current Obesity Reports. It was by a group of researchers from Naples and Rome, Italy. So it is actually a review paper. This is not a study itself, but it was reviewing the available literature. And what they wanted to do with this paper is they wanted to summarize the current evidence on the efficacy and the safety of a very low calorie ketogenic diet as a potential treatment for lipedema, especially when there is also obesity present. So that's what they were specifically looking at. And they reviewed the literature. They looked at what is the definition of lipedema, what are the characteristics of lipedema, what is the pathophysiology that's happening in lipedema fat, and then how does a ketogenic diet, what could be the mechanisms, why would it be effective for those characteristics? And they specifically chose to look at a calorie restricted ketogenic diet. So they did a review of 2 papers on that used a ketogenic diet in the context of lipedema. One was the Norwegian Lipo Diet study. It was a pilot study with 9 women with lipedema, and they did 7 weeks of a ketogenic diet followed by a 6 weeks of the standard Norwegian fare. And so they reviewed that paper. And then they also reviewed a paper by Roberto Canadero and others out of Italy. And they were, it was a case study looking at 22 months after using a ketogenic diet for an individual with lipedema. So they extensively looked at those 2 papers. They gave a mention of the Polish study that had 2 groups of participants with lipedema, and one group used a ketogenic diet, and the other group used a low carbohydrate diet. So more carbs in the second group, but still reduced carbs. As far as I can tell, looking at all those papers that they included in this review, none of those used a very low calorie ketogenic diet. But those are the papers that they looked at. There are, of course, as we know, several other studies, another out of Poland, another out of Russia, some case studies out of Brazil about using a ketogenic diet for lipedema. But these 3, and mostly these 2, were the ones that they looked at when they did this review paper. So some interesting points I thought they made was they were looking at what should we use to measure and monitor and for data collection when we're doing a study on participants with lipedema and using some kind of nutritional intervention. And so they talked a lot about using BMI versus using a waist to hip ratio. And I think there's been a lot of comments in literature about this, that the BMI is is looking at what you are, your weight to your height, and doesn't really tell you a lot about where the fat is or and stuff like that. So they really felt that the waist to hip ratio, typical for lipedema, is you have a smaller waist and larger hips, and looking at that tells you a little bit more about where the fat is. But then they also talked about body composition versus just using a tape measure and measuring circumferences on body parts. And they said that body composition really gives us a lot more information, because you can measure the volume by using your tape measure, but you don't know anything about what's in that area. What percentage is fat? What percentage is lean mass? What percentage is fluid? And so they really said that, we need all of these things. We should have BMI, but we should really have waist to hip ratio as well. We should go ahead and do volume measurements with the measuring tape, but we really need to have body composition as well. And then other things that they said that we should be measuring, we do these kind of studies of course, we need weight. We should have labs. And they recommended doing a complete blood count with platelets, monitoring electrolytes, doing various blood labs that show how your kidneys and your liver is functioning. Look at the glucose levels, the insulin levels, of course, a lipid panel, looking at vitamin D and calcium. They also suggested monitoring thyroid function with TSH and T4. I would recommend also use T3 and reverse T3. And they said to look at ketones, specifically BHB, either in blood or urine. When you're specifically doing a ketogenic diet, you should probably monitor ketones. And then also they said to do a complete urine analysis with microalbuminuria. So is there protein showing up in the urine as part of that urine analysis? So then they did a little section in the paper. They talked about, so what are the treatments available for lipedema? And they talked about there's surgical interventions and then there's conservative therapy. And I thought it was really interesting that they pointed out, when you're talking about conservative therapy, there's two key components of it. And one major component should be psychosocial support. Oh, how interesting that they say this. And that may include psychotherapy, dietary counseling, and self-management education. So it's not enough just to do the other important component, complete decongestive therapy. We also need to have that psychosocial support. I was glad that they said that. For those of you that don't know, complete decongestive therapy includes manual lymph drainage, and that's a massage technique, compression therapy, exercise, and they put as part of that also weight reduction. So then the paper talked a lot about this vicious cycle between obesity, lipedema, and inflammation. And they talked about how both obesity and lipedema affect each other. So it's a bi-directional relationship, and they both can accelerate the amount of inflammation that's present in the tissues. So, and they both can affect, more fat being deposited, damage to the lymphatics, all these various things, and it could be a very vicious cycle. So how can we interrupt that? And so they're suggesting a major way to interrupt that cycle is through diet and doing some kind of nutritional treatment. And so they did a little bit about the proof in the literature about how a ketogenic diet is effective for obesity. And they all specifically looked at the information on a low calorie ketogenic diet and a very low calorie ketogenic diet. And so I think there is part of the medical community is still caught in that paradigm that we cannot cause fat to be reduced. We cannot lose weight unless we restrict calories. And they fail to see that it might be you just have to restrict carbohydrates, and you might not have to restrict calories. But so these authors are very much in that paradigm that they feel like it's not enough to restrict carbohydrates. They feel like you also must restrict calories. And so They said that given that we have a lot of excess adipose tissue deposited in lipedema, and that often it's also accompanied by obesity, that the best intervention, the best dietary intervention may be a very low calorie ketogenic diet. So they decided to really look at that, and then they made some recommendations based on their review of the literature. This is what they are recommending, and they're recommending a phased approach where you're doing something that's super restrictive and super low calorie, and you're gradually adding calories and allowing more carbohydrates as time goes on. So this is their recommendations. They say for the first 8 to 12 weeks that there should be a severe calorie restriction to 600 to 800 calories a day. And so you have very low carb, but also the total calories is 600 to 800 calories a day. In my opinion, that's way too low, and that may cause a lot of suffering, but this is what they say to do. And then through the phases, you gradually would increase the carb content and increase the calories until they are reached to about 1,300 calories. And during that time, you're going to add back starchy beans and whole wheat, which I don't think that I would not put any of those in your diet at all, but they're saying to go ahead and add that. And so until finally at the very last, which would be the lifelong diet, would be 1,500 to 1,700 calories per day, and basically a low carbohydrate Mediterranean diet. Now, unfortunately, they did not state in the article what they are considering, how many carbs are in a low carbohydrate diet. I don't know. And what exactly are the foods that are in a Mediterranean diet? This is not very well described in the literature in general. Everybody has their own impression of what a Mediterranean diet is. And so for me, there wasn't enough description on here that even if someone chose to follow this, that number of calories and a low carbohydrate Mediterranean diet, they did not give enough description so someone could actually adhere to that. So you'd have to do a lot of your own research to see what is meant by those parameters. So I think, there is some papers talking about using a Mediterranean diet for lipedema, and it was shown to have some success. It was preferable to a standard, very high carbohydrate Western diet. But there, in the studies that they didn't review, that compared low carb versus very low carbohydrate ketogenic diets, the decreased carbohydrate intake definitely had superior effect on lipedema symptoms. So, but they really felt that this is probably the way to go. By their review, they felt like that severe calorie restriction and definitely carbohydrate restriction was the good way to go until eventually it would be to whatever is seen as the Mediterranean diet. They didn't feel like it would be sustainable if they didn't add back carbohydrates and calories. Now, I agree on the calories that humans are not meant to exist on just 600 to 800 calories a day. So I do agree that we probably need more calories, but I'm not so sure that it's unsustainable if you, unless you add so many carbohydrates back. But this is like the conclusions that they came to. They did acknowledge that the very low calorie ketogenic diet has some limitations. One, it is associated with potential nutrient deficiencies. Yeah, I would say so. If you're only getting 600 to 800 calories a day, more than likely you're not getting enough protein, enough micronutrients, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, and it doesn't, there's a lack of long-term research that shows that this is useful. And then they acknowledge there also is some Mediterranean diet limitations. It says, this is a direct quote from the paper. It says, Mediterranean diet provides a nutrient-rich approach that promotes heart health and also possesses anti-inflammatory properties. Okay, I'm not sure that that's been proven, but that's kind of like the conventional wisdom is that's the Mediterranean diet is supposed to be heart healthy. It said its effects, they said that its effects on weight loss for lipedema may be limited. And definitely in the studies that have been done so far, it's showing that a ketogenic diet is much more effective for lipedema symptoms, including weight loss. It was much more effective than a Mediterranean diet, however you define that diet. So their conclusion was that their conclusion, I think that they had before they even wrote this paper, was that very low calorie ketogenic diets can be an important tool for lipedema. And so I think that is, it just adds to our information about dietary interventions for lipedema. This is an approach that is being studied, being talked about. The recent Lipedema World Congress that was held in Potsdam, big part of the Congress that they were talking about that. So it's being discussed, and I think it's definitely something that is important for us to, as we learn about lipedema and how we can best manage it. I'm just checking over here to our comments and seeing who's here. Thank you so much for you that post and say who you are and where you're watching from. And I got Marilee and Karen from Michigan, and Aileen, thanks for being here again from Puerto Rico. Gail from Florida. Carolyn from Australia, thank you. I think it's quite early in the morning for you. And Kira, nice to have you here again from Baltimore. Colleen from Australia. And you make a comment, Colleen, on a low carb diet you're advised to read the nutritional panel and choose food with 5 grams of carbs per 100 grams. That's certainly one way to do it. So you're looking at that nutritional panel that's on the box and trying to get stuff that has as few grams of carbs as you can. I would just want to see what are the total grams. So if your serving size is, for instance, 300 grams of something, then if it only has 5 grams per 100 grams, you're getting, with that single serving, you're already getting 15 grams of carbs. And typically for a ketogenic diet, you want to keep it at or below 20 grams of carbs per day. And so with that single serving, you might have used up 15 of your 20 grams. And so I would not calculate how many carbs per 100 grams. I would just, you could just get a total of your grams of carbs, and that can help you. For whatever you decide you want to have your upper limit be, then that's kind of an easier way, less math. Although if you're like Gail Straker, she loves math, so she might enjoy that. Hi to Mary and Bethany. Hi. Deborah from Arkansas, and another Deborah from Australia. Beverly is in Memphis, and Gloria is in Ogden, Utah. And Gail Ewald, I'm not sure how to pronounce your last name. What about brown rice instead of pasta? Unfortunately, they're both grains. I mean, pasta is made out of wheat grains typically, and rice is a grain as well. And so both of those are going to be high carb. But not only that, a lot of times grains of any kind can be inflammatory. It may be especially inflammatory to lipedema. We don't know this, but just for humans in general, grains can be inflammatory to the gut. So something that I would want to avoid is rice as well. But everybody's individuals. You choose what is going to work best for you. And Aileen says, I'm using an anti-inflammatory diet, and it's an excellent diet for me. So through trial and error, she's found something that works for her. And that's the main thing, is figuring out what works for you. We at Lipedema Simplified, we give you some general recommendations, but everybody is so individual. And you need to find out what works for you socially, culturally, just your preferences. What are your tolerances? What are your allergies? So all those things come into figuring out what's going to be preferred for you. And these studies that I report on, they're showing specifically what these certain diets, what's the impact that they have on lipedema symptoms. And so far, there is a lot of evidence that using restricting carbohydrates can have an almost immediate effect on pain. And then also during the several months of using this way of eating, it also reduces the volume, reduces the fat mass, has all these other kind of impacts on lipedema symptoms that other diets simply don't have. I want to now switch gears and tell you about a couple of things that are coming up with Lipedema Simplified. One is that, as I mentioned before, we're going to have a free webinar happening tomorrow. Now, there's going to be a link below for you to sign up. And it's tomorrow, Friday, November 17, 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And it's going to be, let me get the title of the webinar. It is Getting into the Holiday Spirit, an Introduction to Lipedema and Lipedema Coaching Special Interest Group. And so this is going to be talking about different strategies of getting through, not getting through, enjoying, thriving through the holidays when you have lipedema, when a loved one, when someone in your family has lipedema. And it will also be an introduction to continuing with a class that is going to be focused just on that and taking you right through the holiday season. We have several coaches that are going to be presenting, and they're going to be talking about various aspects of relevance to lipedema and surviving, thriving with lipedema, especially during the holiday season. So check this out. Get more information from that link that you see below. And remember that even if you're not available, if you register, then you can have the replay. So that you can still get the benefit of that free webinar, even if you're not available tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So I hope you'll avail yourself of that and register for that. The course itself is going to be starting on Monday. So this is a nice little intro to the class and see if it's something that you want to do. But there's going to be a lot of information, information on strategies and tidbits and great stuff just by being at this webinar. So please join us. And with that, I am going to sign off and see you again next time with another research update. And it's so wonderful being here with you. Thank you so much for posting in the chat, and I'll see you again next